What is up, YouTube? It's Roy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of $50 Upgrades, the show where I take you through my proposed $50 upgrade for the Precon in question. Today, we're covering the last Precon this week for Bloomburrow in Peace Offering, headed up by Miss Bumbleflower. If you're interested in my full brew for Miss Bumbleflower, it's going to be linked down in the description for you below. But Miss Bumbleflower is a 4-mana 1/5 rabbit citizen with Vigilance, and whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it gains flying until end of turn, and that goes off every time you cast a spell. And the second time it happens in a turn, you draw 2 cards. I think Miss Bumbleflower is a lot better than I originally thought it was going to be after brewing my actual brew for the deck. I think this is a deck that can marry +1/+1 counters and drawing cards so well and can become an actual threat. I think it's easy just to think of this as a group hug deck, but I really think this deck can become a real threat once you put some value into it. Well, I did my best with this $50 was to try to make it as best of a +1/+1 counter / drawing cards threat as I could. Try to put all the things that can pay it off for us. And I'll go through all the cards I removed. I'm not going to go through every card I removed one by one, but I'm going to kind of hit my highlights as we go through them. But remember, the goal is spin towards +1/+1 counters, spin towards drawing cards, trying to become a threat instead of just handing people cards. Well, the first page already shows off what we're trying to do, and that's become a threat. Absent Battle Priest and Absent Falconer both say each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink for Battle Priest and flying for Falconer. What this is intended to do is spread those counters with Bumbleflower across all of our creatures, and then get our creatures to have this buff, this benefit from these guys, and make them harder to deal with. Yes, Bumbleflower is going to get things into the air, but with its ability for that turn. But this happens all the time, attacking, blocking. I think these just become such good effects, and we're playing another one as well that we'll talk about in a couple slides. Champion of Lambholt feels like a perfect finisher for any deck that has +1/+1 counters because you can get it bigger and bigger sooner. Its top ability says that creatures with power less than it cannot block creatures we control. So our goal is to get Lambholt bigger and bigger so that none of our opponents can block us. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we put a counter on Champion of Lambholt. So it grows by itself, but hey, we can also use Bumbleflower to get it bigger and make it so our opponents may not even be able to block us at all. Denny Pink comes down and gives all of our creatures, whenever one or more counters are put on this creature for the first time each turn, draw a card. This is going to make it so we're drawing a card effectively every time we use Bumbleflower's ability by casting a spell. Not only that, but we have other ways in the deck to put counters on things, so Danny Pink's going to reward us by drawing us cards and allow us to pay off drawing cards and those effects. Decanter of Endless Water is a 3-mana mana rock, which may look odd to some people, but it gives us no maximum hand size, so that way we're not worried about drawing all of these cards, and we want to try to add a couple of these effects if need be. We get a fun, repeatable ability in Evolution Witness. It says whenever one or more counters are put on Evolution Witness, return target permanent from our graveyard to our hand. This is going to be useful to get things back that people remove if they destroy them, or get certain things that we may need back from our graveyard if we get milled or if something happens. I like that we have a repeatable way to get things back if things get removed. Growth Spiler for a little bit of ramp, draw a card and put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. Again, it draws us a card, so it will pay off some of those styles of abilities. Incubation Druid seems like a slam dunk for this deck. I'm not entirely sure why it wasn't in it. Add 1 mana of any type of a land you control could produce, but it has a counter on it. You had 3 of that mana instead. Well, it just takes 1 turn with Bumbleflower to put a counter on it, and then it's going to start tapping for 3 mana, which is a great ability. Innkeeper's Talent from the main set, we're bringing it in at beginning of combat on your turn. You put a counter on target creature you control. Getting up to level 2 gives all of our permanents with counters on them ward 1. Great way to start protecting our board just a little bit. And if we pay 4 mana to go up to level 3, whenever we put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, we put twice that many on instead. Just makes more and more counters getting put on each time. Kutzel comes in as a way to really pay off us having counters on things. Its bottom ability says whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deals damage to a player, we draw a card. That's great, right? Because those counters are going to be spread out all the time. It also stops our opponents from casting spells on our turn, potentially allowing us a little more breathing room as we do what we want to do. Min, we're paying a couple dollars for it, but it has a great ability. When we draw our second card each turn, we make an illusion that gets bigger for each other illusion we control. But when those illusions die, you put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. A way to cheat some cards in is going to be very helpful. Narset, it got that new Critters reprint, but works really well with Bumbleflower because it says that each opponent can't draw more than one card each turn. This will stop our opponent's draw strategies if they go to do that. But what I really like about Narset is it's going to stop us handing out so many cards when we use Bumbleflower's ability. So for the first one each on our turn, we're going to hand it to an opponent. But when we go to do the second one, we're going to try to hand it to the same opponent, but they're not going to be able to draw because they're not allowed to draw more than one card each turn. And it's going to take away that small downside of Bumbleflower's ability and let us just have all upside. And then we can look at the top four and get a non-creature, non-land card from them, put in our hand if we want to. Otherwise, we just shut our opponents down from getting that group hug card draw and just allow us to get more value. On the trail, whenever we draw our second card each turn, you can put a land from our hand on the battlefield tab. This just allows us to get multiple land plays per turn. Remember that Bumbleflower on the second cast allows us to draw 2. So we should ideally be getting it every turn and allow us to be putting lands down tapped. Prof's Eidetic Memory. Whenever in a battlefield we draw a card, we have no maximum hand size. In the beginning of combat, if we've drawn more than one card this turn, we put X counters on a target creature where X is the number of cards we've drawn -1. So basically, if you think about it, we put a counter on it for each card other than our card for the turn that we drew on a creature. And this is great because it's just going to make our creatures bigger and pay off into all these other +1/+1 things that we had to deal with. Solitary Confinement is a personal card of mine that I love from some of my Enchantress decks, and I think it works really well here. At the beginning of your upkeep, we sacrifice it unless we discard a card. We don't draw on our draw step. We have Shrouds. We can't be the target of spells or abilities, but you prevent all damage to be dealt to you. What Confinement basically does is says, you can attack me, but you can't damage me. I'm going to do everything I want to do, and all I have to do is pitch a card each turn. But if we have Bumbleflower drawing us 2 cards every turn with her ability by casting 2 spells and all these other things, I think we're going to have no problem being able to pay for the confinement. And then you have things like Evolution Witness and other ways to get cards back from your graveyard if you have to pitch them. Confinement just feels like a slam dunk in a deck like this. Sovereign Akanekahow just feels like another slam dunk in this deck. Whenever it attacks for each creature you control with power greater than its base power, you put counters on it equal to the difference. This is just going to start effectively doubling the amount of counters that are on all of our creatures. And the cool part is only Akanek has to attack. So if you have other creatures that have come in this turn or can't attack, they're still going to get their counters doubled. And this is going to get bigger, and it's going to start really compounding the amount of counters that we have. One of my favorite planeswalkers that we get to have access to here is Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, a 5-mana 4 loyalty planeswalker that says whenever you draw cards, you put a loyalty counter on it. We can pay 0 to draw a card and -2 to make a spirit that has that same ability. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on it. I mean, that spirit is going to get bigger and bigger, and then the -12 can just take someone's board and erase it out of time and space. But I love Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. It's probably one of my favorite planeswalkers printed in the last year or two, and I love having another deck that we have access to play it in. And then just like those 2 Abzin creatures at the start of the ads, we get Tuskguard Captain, giving all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them trample, and this makes us hit even harder. Yes, Bumbleflower's ability will start pulling creatures in the air, which is a great ability, and it's going to give us some evasion, but we want some other evasion as well, especially if Bumbleflower leaves the battlefield. Then we still have these abilities, right, to give those abilities to our creatures. As far as removing goes, what I tried my best to do was look at cards and say, is this really going to benefit this +1/+1 counters draw strategy? I'll say before we continue on removing cards that I am not a huge group hug fan. I really don't like the ideas of the decks because I worry that at certain tables you're just going to end up enabling your opponents more than you're going to help yourself. So I did take out some of those group hug effects like Gear Priori, but I tried my best to just put in cards that I thought were strictly better and take out cards that maybe got outclassed by the things that I took out. Like Jolly Gerbils, I'm not doing a bunch of gifting on any of the cards in the deck, so it's not really going to help me out very much. Colonian Hydra, it makes sense, right? Comes in with counters when it attacks, the counters get doubled. It makes a ton of sense in a deck like this, but I took it out for those cards that can give me more value all of the time instead of just when it attacks. Quain, again, makes a ton of sense because everybody's going to draw a card and we're going to draw a card too. But again, I want to stop myself from giving my opponents cards if I don't have to, because again, I really think it's going to lead to more of a threat for us than good. Like Promise of Loyalty seems like a fun card. Put a vow counter on a creature. Everybody puts a vow counter on a creature they control and sacks the rest, and each of those creatures can't attack you as long as a vow counter on it. But again, I'd rather focus on the consistency, focus on the cross section of all these abilities in our deck and making sure they're all there and working together. Because if you want your deck to get better, if you want it to get more consistent, all of your deck needs to work together as an engine and kind of working together as a machine. And I feel like cutting some of these random cards is going to help with getting that, that consistency there. I like things like Selvala to add some mana and get some life. It's an interesting card, but again, cut it for the things that are going to give us more personal value. Spore Frogs makes a ton of sense. Sack it to prevent all damage. We could get it back with some effects. I think Spore Frog was maybe the one card that I didn't want to cut the most, because I do actually like it. I think it's a fun way to add to the deck. But again, I was just trying to make sure we get that consistency to really have a ton of fun. But let's go with one playtest just to show you what the deck will look like with my ads. Keep it a 4-lander with a Foxglove, Teferi, Temporal Pilgrim, and the Sunscorched Regents. We got an interesting little hand here to start with. Put the Citadel in tapped because it's going to come in tapped no matter what. I think it's probably easier to just get that out of the way. Turn 2, we really don't have a good play as we're building up towards Bumbleflower. I'll put the Heath down. I guess I'll just choose green so I can tap for green or a white there. Turn 3, again, no play, so we'll get that Temple of Plenty in tap. We're going to scry 1. We scry a Forgotten Ancient. So whenever a player casts a spell, you put a counter on it, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you can move any number of counters from them onto other creatures. I really like Forgotten Ancient. It's a great card for that. I think we'll happily keep it on top. Turn 4, I think I'll get the Ancient down, just because on my opponent's turns, I expect them to cast at least a spell or two. So let's say for the purpose of this, that each of them cast a spell. So Ancient starts with 3 counters on it. Of course, at the start of our upkeep here, we have no creatures to move them on to, but in the future we will. Let's see. Because I have this land in my hand, I know that I actually can Growth Spiral, draw, put this down, and get Bumbleflower down. That's awkward because then I won't get the cast this turn, but that's okay. Forgotten Ancient gets another counter. He gets another counter for the Bumbleflower. We'll move past our turn. Again, let's just say that everybody casts at least one spell on their turn. So as we come back to our turn for turn 6, I guess I'll just move... Let's move half of them over to Bumbleflower. I mean, I guess logic could dictate we could move more of them, but let's just have it out. That way at least we have two decent attackers this turn, as long as we can cast 2 spells. Draw for turn, Seacombe Coast is going to come in tap, which is kind of unfortunate, but we do have 6 mana. Foxglove doesn't seem bad. Teferi seems great. It's kind of what we want to do anyway, right? Peerless Recycling can get something back from our graveyard. Sunscorched Regent is going to start getting counters, but I kind of like Teferi here. On the cast, I'm going to give Bumbleflower the counter and give it flying until end of turn. And we'll give somebody that card. Then Teferi's going to come in. We'll 0 it to add a loyalty counter on it to draw a card. And now we get a land for next turn, which is great. The Ancient would have gotten a counter on cast. And so next turn, I want to start making those spirits, right? Getting the spirits going so they can start getting up on cards. And just one mana left, so not much we can do here. Start of my upkeep. I'll move a couple more counters over to Bumbleflower, just so she can start being a threat in the air to our opponents. Here we get a Flooded Grove in, so on turn 7 we're at 8 lands. So now we could potentially cast a couple spells and take advantage of this. So I'm going to go ahead and -2 Teferi right now to make that spirit. The reason I'm going to do that is because I know I'm going to draw a couple cards. I want to make sure that both the Spirit and Teferi get as much as we can for it. So I've got 8 mana. I like the idea of Mr. Foxglove. I like the idea of Baird. I like the idea of Sunscorched Regent. There's a couple interesting cards. Peerless can get back only permanents. So I don't have any permanents in my graveyard yet. So I'm gonna try to cast Foxglove here. I think that's gonna put a counter here. Bumbleflower is going to have an opponent draw a card. I'll put a counter on Bumbleflower to give it flying until the turn and can't be blocked. And then It feels awkward, but I think I'm going to try to generous give something main. The reason is I draw 2. This goes up to 5. This gets 2 counters, right? This gets a counter. Somebody's thing dies and gets a 3/3. But on the cast, I'll give the Ancient the counter and make it in the air now. So now it's a 6/9 in the air. And, Bumbleflower's a 9, 13 in the air. And now these are both threats. So the thing I like about this deck is Bumbleflower just progressively becomes more and more a threat as your opponents have to deal with it. Teferi should have gotten one, I realized, at the start of the turn. So take an attack with Bumbleflower, take an attack with the Ancient. I think we're in a great shape here. We'll go one more turn, turn 8. I'll move 4 of these counters. I'll put 3 of them on Foxglove. I'll put 1 of them on the Spirit. So start of the turn, we drew counter here. Counter here. Didn't draw a land, but that's A-okay. I kind of like the idea of getting Tameo down. We'll tick it up 1 to do its ability for Foxglove, for Bumbleflower and Foxglove. But on the cast, I'm going to put a counter on Bumbleflower in the air, and it gets flying, gets flying till end of turn. And then I'm going to go ahead and cast Farseek, put the counter on Foxglove, get it in the air. That's going to draw me 2 counters on Teferi, 2 counters on the Spirit. I guess I probably should have -2 Teferi before I did that, but that's okay. The land doesn't really matter because I think we're kind of at the point where I think you can kind of see what the deck's trying to do and why I think it's so effective. And now these 2 in the air take a big attack. I think you're starting to see where the goal is. We'll draw a couple off Tameo for them dealing damage. And, you can just kind of tell what the goal of the deck is. Get the counters, put the things in the air, hit for damage. Just be a threat, not just, put counters on things and draw cards. Let me know what you think for my $50 upgrade of Miss Bumbleflower. I'd love to hear what you think. How did you upgrade your Precon? I'd love to talk with you about it down in the comment section below. And I catch you guys next time.